Straight like close to the heart of the crowd. We're flipping the script, turning it around. Every voice we hear, every soul we find has a spark of truth that can change your mind. It's the reversal, turning it all upside down. The reversal, truth from the lost and found. Hope in the heartbreak, light in the rain. The reversal, you'll never see the same again. The reversal, the story's yours.
Welcome to The Reversal. And yet again, we have another wonderful guest, Angie Lohr, who's joining us. Angie has an incredible story, as you're about to discover. And here on The Reversal, we are all about finding beauty and unexpected wisdom and surprising flipping of scripts through the life and stories of our guests. We believe there is incredible beauty and just a sense of surprise and wisdom that can be discovered as we journey with and talk with our friends. And so Angie's story is no different. Angie has experienced everything from success in business to nonprofit leadership. In 2019, Angie was awarded Woman of the Year, a huge honor in Kelowna, British Columbia, for her work amongst vulnerable women. And so Angie has founded a nonprofit and led it. She has since been an executive director of a Women's Recovery Center in Winnipeg and has some new adventures that are on the horizon as well. So we're very excited to have you, Angie. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, my friends. Good after you.
We're really looking forward to chatting with you, and we're grateful that you've traveled all the way to Kelowna to our little studio from Winnipeg.
Yeah, no, thank you. It worked out perfectly, right? Little holiday, little friends, little podcast.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. So we're breaking through barriers.
We are.
Social, physical, systemic, and to find you kicking down the doors against when the odds are stacked against you. Right. So why don't we just jump right in? Anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think probably nobody epitomizes the kicking down doors title of this podcast episode the way you do. And, you know, we've both known Angie for a long time, and, you know, you're the kind of person who exemplifies resilience and, you know, and a never say die attitude. And so yeah, we've got some great questions. I'm curious to dive into what's behind all of that and how did you get that? And of course, there's some really challenging pieces of your story too. You've gone through some really tough times. And so as you're comfortable, we want to ask questions and learn more about some of the threads and pieces that you learned from that time that you bring into your present day.
You know, and finally I had to laugh at kicking down the doors because literally I had kicked down some doors. What? Like, no lies, that lies. I was looking for some of my sponsees or something, and here she was in the shack. I just hoofed in the door, just grabbed her and ran out. So, you know.
So actual doors to be
So
kicked.
actual doors have been kicked.
I love it.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's jump right in then.
Okay.
And we'll let you tell your story. And why don't we start with where you are right now? What brings you joy? Kind of like where you're at today.
Okay, so presently I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, born and raised. Just moved back, I guess, almost 3 years now, after spending 17 years in West Bank and Kelowna area, right? Husband semi-retired and just didn't want to stay in Winnipeg while I was still working, so we moved out here on a new adventure, and what an adventure it was. Good, bad, and ugly, just like the movie. So rewarding, you know, it was such a great move. Sadly, he's passed away, you know, part of the story as well. So then COVID hit, a couple of my girlfriends, you know, moved to Mexico as well. So family's all back in Winnipeg. So I decided to go back there. I've been executive director of second stage recovery homes for men and women. But just found lately that he wasn't burning my passion. And I needed to come back, not necessarily to frontline what Kelowna was, but in this field of still helping vulnerable people and being of some sort of purpose.
Right.
You should say, if you're a viewer or listener, this conversation is going to likely include some references to some addiction and some drug use. So if that's a trigger for you, or if it just leaves you feeling unsafe, maybe this is the time to switch over to one of our other episodes. So Angie, maybe just dial it back a little bit. Like, where'd you grow up? What was life like in those early years? Yeah.
Tell us, okay? Yeah. So my parents were German immigrants. A lot of trauma in their lives. My mom actually was Mennonite, escaped out of Russia, went into Germany, and just lived quite a horrific life, during the war and before the war. Met my dad. They came over to Canada with basically clothes on their back on the boat, as they say, right? So my brother and I are born here in Canada, second generation, and just a big German, outspoken, loud, loving food family.
A lot of farmer sausages.
Lots of farmy sausages, meat, potatoes. All cool. Well, oh my gosh, it just had so.
But actually, probably even in that, there's a bit of a clue to your story, because they're survivors. They're resilient. And I think that's a thread that we're going to see through your story.
For sure, right? So yeah, pretty well, went through high school, graduated a little early, went to college, had a bit of a marketing degree, somehow plopped into the printing industry, and so kind of excelled in that for about 20 years. And then kind of took a little left turn and kind of tripped on freebasing cocaine, which just was, unexpected, uneducated. At that time, it was mid-'80s. I just lost my first husband to mental health. There was kind of no return for him. I had some traumas during my own life. I think also trauma gets shared if your parents, right, and siblings have had trauma. My mom believed in sharing that story. But back then, you didn't talk about going to counselors. And, she went and talked to the pastor and stuff if she had problems. But you just put up, shut up, and kept walking type of thing, right? So I think sharing her stories, there's a couple incidents of early sexual abuse as a child from strangers. But that never seemed to affect my drive or our values. Go to school and get a job and get a degree and go out there. So married just a wonderful man who became mentally ill and probably alcoholic in the last stages, right? So our marriage had to separate. It was just no choice of, he became very bipolar and was locked up in the institutions, but always released. And when the alcohol became an issue, right? And understanding what I know now, like what a life expecting journey, I did go to school after for a little more investigation on how I became that, but no education could have given me what I've learned today.
Life experience. Life in the spirit.
So how old were you when you were in that marriage, for your first husband?
So we were together since I was maybe about 20 years old. So 28, he became very ill and our marriage ended just when we were ready to have some kids, perhaps. So we'll take a little step back.
So you were really young. That's pretty traumatic to experience that in your 20s.
Yeah.
Any age, but especially.
No, and we had a wonderful marriage. And, no one talked about mental illness at that time. No one really talked about alcoholism. That was kind of taboo. Never mind drugs or anything or divorce, right? So, no, it was very heartbreaking and very sad to watch. So he just continued on a downward spiral and, health just took him down and never did recover. So I had a bunch of friends, everybody owned businesses, we all had really good jobs, houses, cars, and it was the mid-'80s, like we were laughing at life, right? And then prospering and doing so well. And a few of my friends, I guess unbeknownst to me, had been already dabbling. I'd never snorted a line of coke in my life. Smoked a little weed, smoked a little hash in my pipe, and that was it. I can't drink, even as a kid. I have a super allergic reaction. I smoke cigarettes. So did I have some addictive personality? I don't know, call it what you want.
Sure.
Yeah. Was there underlying, today I know that trauma underlines that.
Yeah.
And when you find an escape, sometimes it takes you away.
And I think one of the pieces we've talked about is that we wanted this podcast to be a place where we could have conversations that we were kind of flipping perhaps some preconceived ideas on their heads, where people kind of, often because they don't know somebody who's got lived experience, that they might make some assumptions that they were sort of always that way, or that they were somehow like they've chosen a life in addiction, or living an unhoused existence. And really, your story, amongst many others that we have interviewed and are continuing to interview, shows that actually it could be any of us.
Could be anybody.
Anybody can live. You were living a prosperous middle class life.
Yeah.
And you just started dabbling with recreational drugs.
Yeah, and not knowing anything. So first off is educating yourself.
Yeah.
If your kids, your family members, whatever, you really have to educate yourself, because what a journey I took everybody on right back then, not going.
Yeah.
So all my friends, all were educated. They all had businesses, all had jobs. And we all grew up, went to university and high school together, and families and marriages. And so they were my peers, right? You kind of trust them, I guess. Say no to drugs, but none of us knew what that was. There were some traumas that had passed. I had some major illnesses, even as a child, all my life. So there was a couple almost death incidences, even growing up, right?
So your body was probably carrying a lot of trauma.
The body was carrying a lot of trauma. And, from what I know, it's usually underlying trauma. Does everybody with trauma become addicted? No. It could be gambling. It could be shopping. It could be food. Not everybody suffers the same way. And so we never knew how addictive it was going to be, and just kept going to our professional jobs. Then you could still smoke in the office. So, we were even doing drugs at work. Right.
And how long could you sustain that till things started to sort of spiral out of control?
Job after job. The resume looks really good. So you can fake it for a while until people get to know you, right? So I used for 13 years. Maybe the last 2 years were sort of out of control. Lost a lot of jobs, husband had passed, and just kind of carried on with working and using. Right. And so, our boyfriends were dealers, and they would just give us dope.
Yeah.
So after 2 or 3 years of kind of getting free dope, like all of a sudden, boom, we were gone or arrested or dead. And here we are kind of flailing, couldn't stop. Right. Going into the judgment and the stigma, it has changed a lot. However, each addiction is the same. Whether it's alcohol, drugs, whatever. They just have different consequences. But it was okay to be alcoholic. Right. Forbid. Yeah. Yeah, forbid. You should be a drug addict.
Right. Where stigma was.
And now you're doing cocaine.
Right.
Even my poor mom said, what am I going to tell everybody? You're just going to say that I'm in recovery and I used to do a lot of cocaine. I don't know what else you're going to tell them. Right. Just so embarrassed. Right. And still with the families that I work with. Right. It's kind of okay on the easy addictions, but don't go to the drug addictions. But you're a straight shooter. Like, you say it as you see it, you call it out. You don't handle a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for?
BS?
Yeah, no, he's devil straight shooter, yeah.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that wasn't always the best mode for you.
Doesn't always serve me.
Hasn't always worked best. Always worked well for you. So in your addiction, where did that lead you? I mean, because you ended up in the sex trade.
Yeah, so, call it what you want. Exploitation is just misuse of a person for somebody else's pleasure. So whether you're trading sex for drugs, trading sex for a place to sleep, right? Exploitation, then there's trafficking. Yeah. Girls are actually kidnapped or bribed or, just don't know any different. And then sex work. So, I have to honor all the sex trade workers because it should be a legitimate job. Finally, a friend of mine, a past sex trade worker, has gone to Ottawa. They can actually file income tax now for the earnings that they have. It's so dangerous, still is. Now everyone's gone online, right? So yeah, the addiction was just too much to keep up with. I was using a phenomenal amount all day. I left Winnipeg at about year 12. It just wasn't working. Had to leave town so I could clean up, go to Calgary, and things just got worse. So, maybe exploitation in the beginning, a little sex work for trading for dope, and then it went to full-time sex work just because it was easy and it was a lot of money. And mostly to feed the habit.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that, the danger that, there are some men involved in sex work, but predominantly there's a lot of women engaged in sex work. And when it's not treated with any element of legality, it allows the criminal world to take advantage of and exploit these.
Well, I wonder why we have so many missing right now.
Right.
Of all sorts.
So regardless of whether people, and I have no idea if our viewers are gonna, where their personal opinions lie in terms of whether they think it should be legitimized or not, but the reality is, part of even what we want to do as part of this podcast is to just challenge people's thinking a little bit, to say, these are beautiful human beings who need to know that they have dignity and worth and are protected, and are not exploited for any reason whatsoever. So I sort of interrupted this. There are some clear sort of threads, I guess, when I look at your story and I go, the resilience, the creativity, the entrepreneurial capacity, the never say die. Like, there's some things that I can see, but I imagine as you look at the sort of the various chapters of your life, are there similarities or key differences that you can kind of point to and go, I learned this lesson here, I never did that again? Or maybe there were some things I learned that I've carried with me all the way that have served me well.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, when you are in an addiction, you're so in denial, so much ego, you don't see, and depending what drug you're using or what it does to your mind, right? Did end up going to school and learned all of that as well. The dopamine, serotonin, how psychotic you go. And so sometimes there's points of no return where your brain just can't function properly. And I think that's why people can't understand, like, what's happened to you? Why don't you just stop? Why don't you just do? The brain is actually physically changed, right? And the guilt and the shame and the obsession to use is so overwhelming that you almost won't stop at anything, right? So when I went to Calgary thinking I could run away from it all, things just got worse. Couldn't stop, psychotic, missing for 6 months on the street with my family looking for me, homeless, in shelters, and seriously did not want to be on earth anymore. I don't know what everybody's journey is. I've been super blessed by having a major spiritual experience that immediately took that using want away.
In Calgary.
Okay. E.T. call home type of thing. Called my family after 6 months, said, I'm pretty sick. They didn't even know if I was alive. My girlfriend was looking at Jane Doe's in the morgue, seeing if it was me, and just running. So I don't know when the journey comes to a change.
Right.
Many of my friends have died. They've never had the opportunity to have that second chance, right? So back to Winnipeg I go, went through detox, went through treatment, went to second stage housing because I was just done. I couldn't even speak. I couldn't make words. And, weighing all of 90 pounds.
I can't believe that you didn't have words.
Well, neither could I. Like, seriously, I was totally damaged. And it was like the movie Alice in Wonderland. Fell down the rabbit hole and met all sorts of strange characters. And boom, popped up like the light going from dark to light.
And this is a really astonishing piece of the story. I forgot this about your story, that unlike many people who have, very difficult sort of, and I'm sure yours was a very difficult journey of recovery too, but that sort of epiphany, or that kind of like, that sort of lightning bolt moment that just sort of radically turned your life sort of a 90 degree.
Instant. It was direct. I knew it.
That's a lot of these so rare. I mean, in your work with people in recovery, how have you ever come across that?
I also follow kind of a 12-step program as well. It does talk about it. I'm not saying 12 steps for everybody. This is my own journey.
Right.
But it does talk about it, not with everybody.
Yeah, but this was a radical faith encounter for you.
Yeah. And they do say that usually some kind of spiritual awakening, so kind of window opening, whether I take that window or not, sure the door could cross dead, as opposed to kicking it open, right?
Yeah.
But I knew within the fibers of my soul that this was the way out.
Universal. One story, one beat, one change at a time. The reversal. Where the last word is yours every time.
I'm just taking a tour through Kelowna. I haven't been here for about 2.5 years, almost 3. I can see that some things haven't changed. They're still shooing people off the street. Tons of upscale construction going on and shooing our homeless population and our vulnerable people, of course, to the outskirts where there's not many services.
Okay.
Yeah, so like anything, any city, nighttime things happen, right? And so a lot of our folks end up sleeping during the day and coming out at night. And sadly, drugs and alcohol go rampant at night. And that's when most of the people are off the streets so that they don't have to be judged.
They don't.
Yeah, it brings me back to the olden days of just trying to find our people to do outreach with. You know, there's some in the corner there. I wish I had some outreach supplies to pass out today. But sadly, this is a reflection of every city. You know, everyone waits till things get out of control and get too far, and people die and continue to live homeless. I've even noticed that in Winnipeg since I've been back. It's twice as bad as it was when I left. Yeah, so like across every city in Canada, the cost of housing, or can you even get a house? If you're on EIA or disability, you can't afford rent and food and anything else. So many more people and families are becoming homeless. The system has to change. We have to invest more into families. And, you know, we started out as helping vulnerable women first, and then we just saw so many men that were homeless as well that needed care. And so, again, it starts at the bottom line of the system. You know, how long are we going to let this go without actually being dignified and respecting people's lives?
Universal. One story, one beat, one change at a time. The reversal. Where the last word is yours every time.
Kick down the door to addiction.
Started the journey. And, you know, even in recovery, I belong to a CA fellowship. But I started, what is that? Cocaine Anonymous?
Okay.
No, because I never drank. So I didn't think that I was welcome at Alcoholics Anonymous.
Right.
Why would I go there? Sure. So much to learn. I mean, you can go anywhere. You know, there's family support, there's solar cameras, there's so much support at Al-Anon, everything like that, right? So I urge people to dive into something. But even people in that fellowship judged me. Oh, you're not going to make it. It's your kind, one of you. And I thought, who are you to tell me? So here we're going to kick down another door of your stigma and judgment. And so I never kind of hid light past, right? So did recover. I went into the printing business. Always spoke like Free United Way. It was kind of always, there's a place in Winnipeg, Main Street Project, that totally saved my life.
So the journey of vulnerability, or, you know, it's not a easy path. It's not a clean journey. You don't suddenly arrive outside of it. But there must have been lessons as you look back in that season of life, strengths that you picked up, life lessons that you picked up that you've carried with you to this day. Are there ones that you can think about?
Well, again, a little more blessed, I guess, on my journey before addiction.
Right.
You know, I had a good upbringing.
Yeah, you have to get serious life skills.
Good foundation, right? And worked lots, went to university and stuff. When I came into recovery, that wasn't possible. I had to rebuild everything. But at least I knew that, right? Had a bit of a head start up on someone perhaps, you know, coming from lesser and having nothing. So those threads are still there. Guilt and shame is overwhelming. You know, I was looking at jail time. So I wasn't quite sure, you know, again, you're so distraught. You know, kicking down the doors goes both ways. That was not a pretty sight in addiction. And when you're surrendered to the devil, so to speak, there's really nothing you would stop at. So I didn't ever think I'd come into recovery. And kind of, you know, which one bites your butt?
So I guess what you say is this consequences.
Super consequences. And I wasn't sure that I had the courage to walk through those consequences. So thankfully for the people that help us, right? For the people like the counselors, the treatment centers, the people in 12-step programs, for those mentors, right, that walk beside me, I would have bailed.
Can you imagine going from having spent, you're like, you've gone to university, you've built a life, you've started a business, and then losing everything, and then having to rebuild again, and then people having the audacity to tell you that you're unworthy, that you're unworthy, or that somehow you have to apologize for being resilient or being, if
You don't belong.
yeah, or you just
I was in sales before, so I'm okay with rejection.
right.
Yes, everyone didn't really know that. So you can reject all you want, but
Yeah.
my heart was always posed with a mission. Right. I'm not going to Bible thump here, but it was always a clear, instructive, this is what you need to do.
You're welcome to share your
This is what you need to do, Angie. And that's, I think what time you said to me, people in this town, I think you're really misunderstood. To say the least. I mean, I think I was really polite. But because I guess I heard the message so strongly that I knew I had to follow it through, whatever that was going to bring.
It gives you internal fortitude to stand up against the rejection and gives you the extra power to kick down the door.
And those who can't speak out, those who are still on the street, to know that everyone just passes by them and doesn't care and whatever. Not that everybody doesn't care, right? There's lots that do. But I knew that I had to be some kind of voice, especially when I came to Kelowna and hopped out on our streets and, started Hope Outreach.
Okay. You go ahead.
I was going to say, that's a perfect segue. I was going to say, you kicked down the door and started Hope Outreach, which I'll let you talk about. That was a very bold step, stepping into serving those in the sex trade specifically, right?
Correct.
And other vulnerable women. I mean, you weren't particular. Within the social agencies, you were a little rogue, considered rogue. So that in itself had its own challenges. So talk a little bit about that phase of your life.
And can I just say too, I no matter who you are, where you are in the world, if you start an agency or a nonprofit that caters to or cares for vulnerable women engaged in one of the most tabooed activities in society, and I don't think it should be tabooed, but I think it is, and you're going to face opposition. So you made a willful choice, and you've talked already about standing in the gap for people who have no voice and advocating and being brave and outspoken. You're not afraid of rejection. Talk us through the thought process. Was it just hey, I'm going to do this no matter what? Or did you have a few dark nights of the soul where you thought, oh, should I really be doing this?
No, there were no dark nights. It was like, again, instant. So I was at a meeting, met Kelly.
Yeah.
As we know, she had moved from North Van. I just moved here. She always wanted to open a women's treatment place.
Okay.
And so kind of told her where my background was. And she says, well, I don't know. Do you want to go walk the streets of Kelowna? I said, oh, yeah, let's go. So it was like 9-10 o'clock at night. Back then, the drop-in was still open briefly. It had just closed. I don't think you had come to town yet with Metro. I think Gospel Mission was the only kid on the block.
Was that the one that was on Leon?
Yes,
Yes, yeah. I used to volunteer there.
Yeah, way in the beginning. And so it was at least a place for the girls to go. Gospel Mission only had men. Right. So we were on the street and we saw at that time when sex trade workers were still on the street selling themselves or picking up clients, right? Internet wasn't there, online wasn't there. There was just moms that weren't getting enough disability. They couldn't go to work or didn't have an education, and they needed to put food on the table for their kids. So one lady would come out twice a week and just have to pay her rent and pay her a pad fee, or she was going to be homeless. There's others, yes, in addiction.
Sure.
Others that were out of foster care, like whatever the reason was. So we saw so many women with the need. Everything was Monday to Friday, 8 to 4. So there was nothing at night. And these women were getting abused and raped and drugged and kidnapped and taken to Vancouver and killed. And the stories were just horrific, story after story after story.
Now, this is a really important point because I think for some of our viewers and listeners, this might come as a bit of a shock. All of this might come as a bit of a shock, but immediately I'm struck by the fact that I think a lot of people would go, wait a minute, moms are involved in this, in the sex trade? Like moms are having to pay rent and this, you know, this is how they, in order to survive, this is what they have to do. Like, I think people have a very limited understanding of what the sex trade is. And I think that fosters stigma because I think there's an assumption sometimes that this is like a sort of flippant choice. Like it's almost like a hobby that someone's choosing to do because they can't be bothered to go get a real job. And in reality, it's usually the last resort, or at the very least, they're forced into it by their circumstances.
Single mom, disabled, can't go back to school, didn't have a degree of any opportunity,
Right.
and has no way to not become homeless other than to do that, right? You know, sex work, you can make a lot of money. I know a lot of girls put themselves through university. And then, yeah, so we did outreach and grew to, I don't know, maybe we had 50 volunteers by then. Maybe we were going out 3 nights a week, strictly women, serving women. Yeah, whatever that looked like. Most of them were at that time in sex work because, again, it was a different time, right? Now times have changed. They're all online. They're all in massage parlors. But there's so many vulnerable women that still need help, that are disabled, that have mental health issues, that have PTSD, that have so much trauma, or just no education, no life.
And you got to a point where with the work and the teams and the volunteers that you were doing, you weren't just engaging with women who are out on the street. You were getting permission to get into the massage parlors, offer them support there, advocate for them, and even advocating with the RCMP, and then developing a bad date reporting system for vulnerable women.
Yeah.
So I think these are all justice pieces. They strike me as pretty pioneering, door-kicking justice pieces. Yeah. And I applaud you for that. I admire you for that.
Well, and we found so many women who weren't able to get into any kind of treatment. Yeah, their needs were too high and nobody was accepting them. Oh, really? So they didn't qualify. And they didn't qualify. That's a better word. Yes. Yeah. They had too many issues, too much work.
See, it's a lot of risk.
A lot of risk. So Kelly and I said, heck with that, because we had all of these women that we knew in the street that wanted to recover. I mean, seriously, who would want to be in sex work full time unless you've got high ambitions? But even then, it's going to hurt your soul somewhere down the line. Who wants to be in addiction? Who wants to be homeless on the street? Who wants to be sticking a needle on their arm? Absolutely nobody.
Except yet that is the stigma that a lot of people carry, the preconceived idea that people carry well.
This possession is so strong. Your guilt, your shame, your PTSD. Most of those women have all had sexual abuse somewhere down the line. So you're dealt 10 defects already before the addiction even.
Like you're not even at the starting line.
No.
You're behind the starting line. So to encourage someone that is wired like you are, one that's not afraid of standing up, advocating, facing rejection for themselves and on the behalf of others, you have taken to your face personally attacks from people, individuals attacking you, but also you have taken it from systems. So between the individuals and the systems, what did you find more challenging? Fighting the systems or standing up to individuals?
You know, the systems were so far behind, right? Not understanding it, not wanting to because of judgment, the stigma. Systems were very hard. Nobody wanted to change. They were questioning our ability, my partner and I, right? When we started Hope and the volunteers, and, you know, judging me that I was going to go out and use again. I've never relapsed since I'd come into recovery, 24 years later.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Well, the gift of going through your experience and bringing that to others. And so I think you'll see in life in general that it's those few people that stand up for the underdogs that have to fight alone.
Well, and there's something to be said too for, I think, the fact that, your volunteers and yourselves were some of the first groups that, as a tent city started to form in this city, and there are tent cities in other cities around Canada and the United States and other places, as those formed, as the one in this city formed, your groups and volunteers were some of the first groups that actually went out and spent time with people in tent city instead of just expecting them to come to a office or a clinic space or some kind of other space, which I think was really profound, because I think that again talks to the reality that that the folks that you care for they have dignity, they have worth. You're going to them, you're not expecting them to come to you.
Reversal. One story, one beat, one change at a time. The reversal. Where the last word is yours every time.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It brings back really good memories of how we used to come out here and actually go into Tent City and support our folks with outreach supplies and naloxone supplies and harm reduction. And what a great job that the volunteers did. Really appreciate everyone's work and the things we accomplished. Yeah, serving vulnerable people, men or women, and kids included. Every city is going through this right now. Never expected fentanyl crisis to hit Canada as bad as it does. And the threat is the same in every city, whether I live in Winnipeg right now or I've been working in Kelowna. The fact that we don't have a better solution for this just appalls me, and the waste of money to keep people's health care and everything intact while they're living homeless. And again, how do they get here? They either don't have an education, they're on disability, they've got disabilities, they've got mental health issues. You can't get into a counselor, you can't get into treatment, you can't get into detox, but everybody expects them to shape up, ship out, get healthy. And why are you living here? Until you actually know what people have gone through and why they're here through the loss of a loved one or loss of their homes. And so my heart goes out to my friends that are still out here. Hopefully there will be a solution coming soon to every city, and maybe the little homes is that answer, but we need to invest more into human dignity these days all across our country. Is that, when you do drive past vulnerable people like this, try not to judge, because you don't really know why they're there. You've got misperceived conceptions or things that you've maybe heard or experienced other people saying, but those really are myths and they need to be broken. Buy someone a coffee, just say hello even as you pass by. You don't have to do much. Donate to a facility that does actually come and interact if you're fearful to do that. But they're just like brothers and sisters, like your own family that's been somehow eliminated from our existence, right? So treat them with respect and dignity and do what you can where you can.
The reversal. One story, one beat, one change at a time. The reversal.
So I could probably reel off a bunch of things that I think are highlights, but as you look back over that season, and maybe even before we start talking about what adventures you're up to today, are there some highlights or some things that you think you look back, some joys that fill your heart that you go, oh, I'm so glad we did that, or is something you're really proud of?
Yeah, so even just starting outreach, right when nothing was there, it was just amazing, and it grew to like 100 volunteers, and we expanded into Vernon, that just as sad, right, with sex work and vulnerable women. And then just opening our house and letting those ladies come off the street who wanted to change their lives. And we have many of them in our community today that both of you know, right, that you still journey with, that have, benefited from that.
And are still alive.
To talk about it, and are giving back and making a change with other people in their lives and their own families, prepared and giving back, and doctors and lawyers.
You must be proud of that.
So proud, right? And just like humbling. That's more what it is, right? Yeah, and then the Courage to Come Back Awards, right? Like, that was crazy. I used to have like a pretty bad relationship with our CMP officers. I call someone nominates me to hand up for an award and I win it. So, it's kind of, like what a switch that is, right? I was still looking at a couple of years jail time. That was a miracle that my lawyer got me off of that too. I hadn't done anything super, but it went on for years and years and years, and neglect and, 16 charges later. And where have you been, Ange? Oh, out to lunch. Just took a little step off. So I've always wanted to kind of make up that lost time.
Is there a part that you want to do over? Is there something you had, if you had the opportunity, you want to try it again or do over? Or are you just a forward-looking person? You're like, I don't look back.
Had I been a little more educated about don't do dope, did I really want to take that journey? But everything for its purpose, right? And you can't look back. I don't regret the past. I can't anymore. It's been repaired now.
It's made you large.
I've had a second chance at life, not everybody does, right? So I just take it really day by day. That is about the only turn. But then I look and think I'm grateful of what I've received and what people have received possibly through me, right?
For people that are listening, that are facing their own barriers, what encouragement or what word of wisdom would you give to them to kick down doors? How would you encourage them to kick down doors? There's an element there, I'm going to guess, where you have to know yourself, what you're capable of or not know, or just have the courage.
Necessarily knew that I was capable of all those things that maybe I've accomplished, but I sure knew what my purpose was. And I usually had the courage to do it. But I think a lot of that came from my family upbringing. Right. My mom was twice me with bringing things to light and breaking down doors and changing and stuff in the family. Right. So I think I learned a lot of that through her, through my faith. Really kept me going. Had I not had the faith I had with that spiritual awakening, I don't know that I would have done this right.
Is there something you would want to leave people with to think about, challenge their notions, their preconceived ideas about addiction, the sex trade, women who are exploited, all of those things?
Yeah. And old sayings, don't judge the book by its cover. Until you actually know someone's story and what their journey is, it's really none of your business to pass that judgment on. I used to judge too before I got there. So I'm not saying that until you actually experience it, right? Stigma and judgment I thought it would have come down a whole lot more, but it hasn't. It really hasn't, especially when you're talking sex work.
So a piece of wisdom.
Oh, do I have any?
You have lots, because you've been my teacher, I'll tell you that.
Piece of wisdom. Perseverance, I try and practice humility, try and strum up the courage. When you think there's a little something in your gut that's saying you need to do it, you just need to do it, right? It's usually your gut telling you. And yeah, I'm used to walking alone on a lot of these journeys. So it's a tough road, but when you look back and kind of see the hand of the work that's taken place, I just can't question it.
And to our listeners, I hope Andy's words stay with you, that you will find a heart of courage and a heart of compassion, and be curious and not judgmental. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time.
One story, one beat, one change at a time. The reversal.
I feel like my hair is being blown.
I was thinking fire hydrant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we could have probably sat and had 3 hours of conversation there. There's probably so many stories, a handful of which we probably couldn't include on the podcast.
Probably. Yeah. I just walk away with a deep respect. And that's not that I necessarily agree with all of her opinions necessarily, but they certainly make me think.
Mm-hmm. True.
Because I didn't have a life like that. I didn't live in those realities. I've walked alongside women in those realities, but I have not walked in those steps. And I just find it really, who am I? Who am I to judge? Who am I to stigmatize? I just want to encourage them to, what can I do to make a difference, to bring dignity, to make them feel worthy, and Angie with lived experience is a perfect person to step into that gap.
I can't imagine what it takes to have lost everything, to go through all of the things that society says you've got to do. You go through high school and university, get your degree and start a business and become, successful at it. And then to have it all go away, and by her own admission, there's her choices there involved, but like to lose her husband, to lose her business, her livelihood, and sort of unwittingly fall into a life of addiction. And we should certainly, as she said, that's not what she wanted. She didn't elect to do that. And then to have to build back again. And I'm just humbled by, I realize as a man, I need to be very careful about, what I'm saying and my opinions around, vulnerability where women are involved, because men are the key protagonists in exploiting women. Yeah. So I think that it was just a real eye opener for me, always has been, learning from her and from people that she's involved with around, sex work and advocacy and all those pieces. But it is inspiring and challenging, and at the same time shocking that we are still, we've known her for almost 20 years, and it feels like as a society, we haven't really advanced that much. There may be a few more facilities for exploited women. Yeah. But legislation doesn't protect them nearly as much as it should.
The thing that strikes me too is that, she comes across as, this strong, we labeled it kicking down the doors. And so there is, and, how many times did she say that she's had to do this alone? That's incredible fortitude and speaks to her iron core.
And courage.
But there is such a softness that is part of who she is, that brings that compassion element that you can't have compassion that's all willy-nilly. There has to be a core to it. And yet to those hard cores, there has to be a gentleness. And I think Angie has personified that well.
Well, it's like compassion undergirded by fire.
Yeah, that's a great term.
As people who've been involved in frontline work, we can tell you that, a lot of folks involved who are unhoused or in addiction or have mental health challenges are not always the easiest people to work with, and they are not always thrilled to see you every day. Any sort of major aha moments for you, or like something getting flipped on its head as we kind of wrap this up?
I just feel, I think there is. I think there's a lot to be said, again, on just debunking that myth that the sex trade is a choice.
Right.
That addiction is a choice. Mm-hmm. That being unhoused is a choice. It's a choice in that it's maybe less than something else, but it's not a choice. There's oppression, there's trauma. Yeah, and
I was struck too by the fact that, and we've heard it many times, but I just, again, like you, to have it reinforced for me, is that so often in our lives, especially those of us who perhaps come from a middle-class background, we assume, such simplistic ideas of people who get caught up in addiction, or in a lifestyle that has to support that addiction. And the reality is, it could be us. We are 2 or 3 or 4 choices away from something, even if it's unwitting, like at a party or something like. And I think that so often for people, it's not until somebody that's close to them, a loved one, a son, a daughter, a nephew, a niece, a grandchild, that suddenly finds themselves caught up in a particular lifestyle that perhaps is frowned upon by society, that compassion, is tapped into. Until then, it's very easy to other people. Yeah, stigmatize them and make them a problem that needs to be solved instead of a human that needs to be loved. And I think that is one of the best reminders I got from Angie today.
Yeah. She's amazing.
Okay, till next time.
All right. Thanks.
Story's yours to tell.